Hi everyone. Right, so this is very long overdue. So it's like a supplementary video to the tool calling workshop that we had about a week and a half already. Right, so that time we stopped at this reasoning loop file because basically I didn't add the execution logic inside this file. Uh, where is it? This one, right? So uh, there wasn't any execution logic uh, to call the relevant functions to see the output, right? So now I've put inside, um, basically I'm just going to go through this execution here. Let's see what it does and how the flow actually goes, right? So only run this when okay, so the file wouldn't be run if this is like an import, right? So require.main strict equality module. Okay, so definitely, firstly, we declare and define our tool registry. So initialize new instance of the tool registry that we defined earlier in the previous file, right? The tool schema file. And then we will build our tool. So we define our tool. Again, two things only, definition and handler inside the JSON. Definition, we just get it from the previous file. And then for handler, just put in some dummy logic in to execute the tool. So arrow function and arrow function as well, asynchronous function. So just a vague uh, input of arguments. Why? Because the arguments will be put in from uh, the be given from the LM, the output from the LM. It will put it as a JSON encoded string, and then it'll be passed to the tool here. So we will just make use of it. And then the body of the arrow function, right? So there will be two arguments inside this argument variable location unit, okay, and then store it here location unit. So this would just be some dummy logic. So for now, we just put some hard-coded temperature figures for certain cities. Um, just just some simple logic first. All right, and then after that, we just return the string as the output for the tool. Okay, location and the temperature. Okay, so that will be the entire tool, and then we just add to the registry, right? We call the method register, and then put definition handler. Okay, now we have the registry and the tool. Then we also define the config because this is one of the arguments for the run agent function here, which is defined inside this file. That this is the function that we'll be calling to run the agent. So config this for now model. Again, I'll just use Mr. because I have the credits for that. And then you can change the model as well depending on which model you're using, and the API key also change it accordingly. And then system prompt, right? System prompt just make it something general. So this is the prompt to define the persona of the model when it reasons through your user prompt and choose the tools that best match your user prompt. So uh, I think more often than not, it will be something like this, right? So an assistant with access to tools given given from the registry, and then just choose the right tools for the user. And at this point, you can also already see some form of the routing, some form of the routing workshop that we had earlier, just few days, was it a few days ago? Right, I think a few days ago, yeah. So actually, yeah, so actually they're quite similar. Routing is actually done by the LM here, the model here. So it will choose the tools that are that best match your user prompt from the registry. And then max iterations, you can also keep on increasing it. But we'll see later that no matter how many more iterations that you allow, right? For the purpose of this demo, it would just stop at the same number, because as long as as long as the tools are called are already good enough, then the model knows that, and it doesn't need to keep on like looping through its reasoning anymore. But it's still a good indicator for max iterations. In case like there are any more tools needed to be called, then it's like a check and balance. Can double check for the model. And then verbose. Verbose is just you indicate whether you want any terminal output to know which part the function is at now. So just put it true for now to let us go through the reasoning behind. Okay, then we call the function. We put in the config and registry that we defined earlier. Okay, and then try catch block. Then we call the function. Assign to agent result. Okay, so this is your user prompt. I want current weather of Kuala Lumpur in Celsius. Okay, and then config registry. Okay, run agent so has 3 arguments. Okay, once everything is done, the output from the agent is out. Then we print out console.log, and then put the outputs in its relevant fields. So .answer, .tool calls made, .iterations. And the shape of this, right, these properties we get it from the agent result, the agent result structure that we define in the types file. So this follows the agent result format, which is the output of run agent. Okay, and then we call the main function. All right, so besides adding the execution logic, I think also just some, I guess, just to share as well. There was actually also a bug in the call LM side, the function here, because apparently for Mistral, there's a difference between camel case, this one. Yeah, so Mistral SDK is kind of different from Mistral API. One uses camel case, one uses snake case. And these two things are referring to the two calls, the property here. So what happens is, once we call the LLM, we send this API call. There will also be this messages array that is sent. So when we call LLM, right, call the LLM, this is actually something standard. So we have to pass in this argument called messages. And this messages array, it forms the context of our conversation with the LLM. The very first message, right, it's the system prompt. So when we go down to the run agent function, right, the run agent function here, the reason why we pass in the config, right, config argument, is because it's the config for the model. And one of the properties, right, is actually the system prompt. Right, so the one that we saw earlier, like you are like this model with these tools, suggest the best tools for the user. So that is the system prompt. And this will be the very first message inside the message, this messages array. And it's a system message. After the system message, it will be a loop of all these messages from user. So that's from us, our user prompt, user, and also assistant and tools. So this one, right? So all these will be added to the messages array. It's an array of JSON and JSON objects. So when the tools are done, they will return a message by the tool, role tool here, right? So same for here as well. And after all these tools are, before these tools are called and they return message, definitely the model itself, it will also return the message. So once we call the LM, then it will return this message. It's a JSON as well, and the role is assistant, basically the model. And when it returns a message, it will return the tools to be called as well. So it's passed inside the tool calls property. And then we will look through the tools, right? We use this function, execute tool calls, look through the tools and execute one by one, and then get the message from each tool stored inside the messages array. So the problem is just that for this tool calls property, so sometimes we need to use the camel case, sometimes we need to use the snake case. That's why there were some changes made as well over here in this call element function. So we just pass in both snake case and camel case. So this is just a specific problem for Mistral. All right. Feel free to change to your own model provider, right? Just change the env variable accordingly. Now we're going to see the output. Okay, so right. Also take note that when you run this file, because your env file .env file is in the repo root, you have to be in the root as well, right? GitHub/toolconnect workshop. Because for env, we only did this thing here, which is import.env/config. So the default env path is the repo root file. So we just run the file from the repo root. Okay, so npx ts node, and then the file path. Okay, and then we run it. All right, so everything is good, right? So firstly, we'll have the React loop. Okay, I'm going to just show here. The run agent function, right? Run agent. So initialize the LM client, and then initialize the messages array. All this is done. And then initialize the tool calls made array. So this array is the property of agent result, right? So once all these tools are done and the output returned to the user, right? This property tells the user what tool calls were made. So initialize this array as well for the agent result. And then we do the for loop, right? We will keep on calling the model again and again until it is satisfied that all the tools needed to be called are called. There's nothing else that it can do. Then it will exit this loop. Or if the max iterations is reached, right? This one we define in the config. If the max iterations reach it already, then just exit. Okay. Right. So this is the first part that we saw. Okay, React reason iteration 1. Right. So it reached here. We are in the first iteration now. Okay, so we run the call LM function, pass in the model, our LM client, Mistral, and then pass in the config dot model. So this is the model name, the messages, which is the context, and the registry, our tools registry. So notice that all this, right, is actually from the, okay, this is, right, so why we pass all this in, again, if we look at the call element function, when we make the API call, right, so .chat.complete, right? So this is from the Mistral API, API docs, Mistral.chat.complete. So even for other models as well, as long as it's like OpenAI compatible, you will see a similar structure as well for your API call to a model, right? .chat.complete, right? So we are doing a chat completion, right? So we will pass in the messages, we'll pass in the tools. So all this is standard. These properties, they are standard across like API calls to models, right? So all this is really applicable to any model that you use, right? So we have to pass them in. So going back to the run agent function, right? So we call LM, we store the output in a system message. Okay, and then we will also pass this into the messages array, messages.push. Okay, because we have two calls, we skip to here. right? So the reasoning is done, right? That was the reason. Now we have the tools from the model output, a system message. Then we get the tools dot tool calls dot map, right? So we okay, so this is just for our convenience. We we want to know, okay, the tools that are needed, right? So we print out the message, act, and then tools requested. Okay, so that was the before that it was reason. Now it is act. So react. Okay, and then now we have the tools needed, right? Then we execute all the tools, store all their output, the tool result messages into tool results. And then from all these results, okay, so this is just a loop to look through all these results, right? And then store their messages into the message array. Yep, store them into the message array. Okay, and then this is the agent result, the final, the output of this run agent function. Notice that this messages, right, is not given to the user because messages array, it's only for the model to do its reasoning. It's just context to let the model know, okay, before that, what were the tools called by the model? What were the user prompt, system prompt? What else? The assistant messages, even the previous model messages that it gave to the user. Right? So it's just for the model's own benefit. The user doesn't need to know the messages. What we want to know is the agent result. So the final answer, right? When it's done with the React loop, right? So finish the iterations. Okay, and we want to know the tool calls made and how many iterations went through, right? So that's it. And so we can see here, like what it's done, right? So the first iteration, right? Reason and act. And then the tool called was the get weather tool because in our user prompt, right, we asked about the Kuala Lumpur weather. Okay, I want current weather of Kuala Lumpur in Celsius. And so inside the model, right, the reasoning, our Mistral model, it it thought about our user prompt here, it processed it, and then returned inside the assistant message JSON that, okay, we should call the get weather tool. And then when we execute the tool, do the execute tool call function, okay, we see that this tool needs to be called, and then we run the tool. And once we run the tool, we output this message, okay, executing get current weather with these arguments, location unit. Note that these arguments, right, location and unit, these are um, given by the LM. So the LM only knows that, okay, to call this tool, right, the get weather tool, you need to have two arguments, location, unit. So we tell the model when we put in the registry, when we put in the tool, right? So when we register the tool, right, register, right? I think it's inside a definition. Uh, hang on. Function. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So when we pass the registry to the model sees that, okay, inside this registry, there's this tool get weather tool. And for get weather tool to function, so this one we defined in another file, right? The one that we saw earlier, tool schema file. And for it to function, it needs two arguments. So parameters, properties, location. Number one is location. Number two is unit. So we defined earlier. Okay, and so when it sees this tool, it knows that, okay, there are two arguments needed, location and unit. And so the model thinks through the user prompt and actually outputs the value for these two arguments. And so this is actually coming from the model. So back to the reasoning loop file, and back to the terminal here, right? What you see here with, right, this part of the output, location, unit, Kuala Lumpur Celsius, right? These two values, they are given by the model itself. So this is where the AI comes in. It can reason through the user prompt and puts in the values for the arguments necessary for that particular tool to function, right? So we are now running this tool, and then tool get current weather, which is the get weather tool. Okay, it's done and it returns the output. So this is the output that we want to see. Okay, the current weather in Kuala Lumpur is 31 degrees Celsius with partly cloudy skies. And again, this is hard coded, right? So as what we can see in the handler function, where when we define our tool, build weather tool, handler. So yeah, just put inside here Kuala Lumpur temp 31. Again, I mean, you can feel free to check out how to build an actual like get weather tool. You need some API calls as well. Okay, now this is where it's quite interesting as well. After the first iteration, right, I purposely allow for 10 max iterations, right? So I put inside config max iterations 10, but then you see it stopped at 2, iteration 2. So what happened here? If we look back at the loop, the run agent loop, right? Inside run agent, the for loop. So okay, so the messages, the tool result message got pushed already, right? From the first iteration. Now we go back to the top of the for loop. This one, right? For loop. Now, so we are doing the second iteration, right? So it ran the console.log, right? So which is here, iteration 2, all right? And then we call the LM again. Now, this time round, when we put in the messages, we call the Mistral model, right? We pass in the messages, we pass in the, yeah, all these different things, right? But especially this messages, right? In the second iteration, it can see that, okay, in the previous iteration, uh, the model itself, it already told the user, you need to call the get weather tool. So it saw that message inside the messages array. And so now, when it reasons through the user prompt again, which is inside the messages array as well, right? The user message, the second message inside this array, it can already see that you don't need to have any more tool calls. So after the first iteration, it's already enough. And so from the call LM function, inside this output, right, there will still be an assistant message. But then the tool calls this one, right, this will be undefined. This is just nothing. The tool calls, right, it's undefined. No tool calls needed. The LM will put it inside here. Nothing to be called. Okay, and content, this one, I'm not sure if there's some output or anything, but if not, then it's just null. All right. Okay, null value. Okay. So when there's nothing to be called, nothing to be done, then back to the run agent function. Right, we still push the message first into the messages array. Now and then we run this conditional loop. Okay, then tool calls undefined. I think it wouldn't be zero lah. I mean, it's just literally undefined, no tool calls made. Then, right, so react, no tool calls, returning final answer. So this is where we see this here. No tool calls, no, and nothing more needed, right, to do. And then we just return the agent result output from this run agent function. So answer, assistant message.content. Right. Yep. Okay. So answer two cosmic iterations. So which is this one? Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. So once this is done, then just run all this, and then also the whole function is exited. And that's why we see over here as well, right? The agent answer, two cosmic and iterations. Right. So that is it. and hope this tool calling workshop got to let more of you be more aware of like how tool calls are made and how it actually works inside the code, right? So it's all just JSON objects, uh, particular functions, call LM, execute tool calls, and run agent, right? So just these three functions inside this file. And yeah, any more things you would like to share or comment about, please feel free to just share inside the WhatsApp community. Look forward to seeing you all in our next workshops. Thank you so much.